So if you've been following the podcast slash the YouTube channel for long enough, you probably know that I'm a big horror movie fan, and one of the largest subgenres of horror being the slasher film. So in general, when it comes to slashers, the way that I kind of describe it, or the way I think about a traditional slasher, at least in a sense, is like a big guy chasing you in a very methodical way, in like a not very rushed way. I think an important aspect of like the kind of format of the typical slashers, which your holy trinity might be like Michael Myers, Jason, Leatherface, like these kind of like literally just big imposing figures that want nothing more than to cut you up and cause you harm. Growing up, I was never a huge fan of these traditional slashers. I mean, I'd say my main exposure to the closest thing to like a one of the pure slashers is Ghostface from Scream. Grew up loving the Scream movies, even though a lot of these tropes and a lot of these kind of traditional elements that you see in these slasher movies, Scream is breaking down and making fun of to some extent. And then I'm also a huge fan of movies that have slasher elements that take it to kind of the next level. I mean, for me, combining sci-fi being a big example, Alien, I think, definitely counts as a slasher. I mean, Ridley Scott himself has said multiple times in multiple interviews that Texas Chainsaw Massacre in space was the vibe that he was going for with the first Alien. I consider the original Terminator a slasher. It has a lot of the same visual elements, like a big guy is, you know, chasing you down, walking at you, you know, like it's a lot of the same visual language that's used in that film. On a slight tangent, I was talking about the Terminator movies a little bit. I really would love to see the kind of new age like Fox properties, things are like a lot of the crew behind Alien Romulus, the Prey movies and stuff like that. It doesn't have to be Fede, but I want to see somebody do another horror Terminator, because it really hasn't hit those horror roots since the very first one. Like a slower pace, kind of methodical kind of thing of like being hunted, just more of a slashery Terminator vibe, I think is something that would really reinvigorate that franchise, because it's just been fucking downhill. So as far as these traditional slashers go, I didn't really do proper deep dives into them, didn't really explore the films and the stories until a few years ago when a little movie called In a Violent Nature came out. In a Violent Nature is a movie that's not for everybody. We have an episode of the podcast up if you want to go listen to my thoughts and Joseph's thoughts on it, and Harvey Thomas Boyd's on there as well. Long story short with that movie, it's basically a slasher film from the perspective of the slasher. More specifically, the character in the movie, Johnny, is very clearly Jason. I think the filmmaker said, like, I have the Blu-ray, I think on the commentary they said that, like, if they were able to get the rights of Friday the 13th, it would have just been a Jason movie. It would have just been a Friday the 13th film. The first time seeing that movie, Joseph and I we watched that in like an early matinee on a weekday, and we had the entire theater to ourselves, and it was just like such a great experience. And I think the biggest impact that that movie had on me in terms of how it has affected how I look at slasher films and slasher characters is it's made me think about the perspective of these silent killers. Because, you know, I guess I've always been attracted to the ones that can talk, the ones that, you know, the ones that are a bit silly. I think that's why characters like Freddy Krueger are more popular. Freddy Krueger or Chucky are kind of like more popular, like when it comes to like younger, even though young kids shouldn't be watching those movies, but those are characters that I think are more memorable in the sense that because they can talk, their personalities are like way more on display. Whereas when you look at the Johnnies, the Jasons, and the Michael Myers of the slasher landscape, you kind of have to look at the other elements to build their characters. And I think over the different eras of the Halloween films, they found interesting ways to kind of hype up the mythic character that is Michael Myers. So this past Halloween 2025, I went through all of the Halloween films. Up to that point, I think I had only seen Halloweens 1 through 3, and then the 2018 reboot of Halloween. So once I got them all in physical media, because that was another whole thing, is like I wanted to own them all, have them all on a mixture of DVD, Blu-ray. Halloween 4 and 5 are hard as shit to find. But once I had them all, I kind of made my way through the month of October watching the films. It was a great experience. And it was just really cool to see how in different eras, kind of the representation of what Michael Myers means and how they kind of evolved him, and the themes is really interesting to me. So as far as the different eras of Halloween, I think that in general, the fans like to kind of there's 4 timelines, and I think that in general within each of those 4 timelines there are some that are definitely more well loved than others. I appreciate all of them to a certain extent, including Rob Zombie, which I'll get to. Talking about the kind of first era, which I guess you could call Halloween 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, or the original mixed in with the Thorn trilogy era, which is like all kind of one continuous thing. The original hype man, the original element of these films that I think did the biggest part in building up Michael Myers as a character and making him this mythic figure is Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis.
He's back, damn it! Do you hear me? Call the sheriff right now and tell him before he finds us.
I mean, this character is the one that sucks you in. He's the one who truly knows how dangerous Michael Myers is. And what you kind of see with this character in this original era is that everyone around him, all the side characters that maybe are encountering Michael Myers for the first time or don't believe all of the kind of excessive elements of what has happened in universe, are constantly doubting Dr. Loomis, and they're constantly kind of questioning the validity of his perspective. The desperation of this performance and the fear that Donald Pleasance puts across screen, not just with his visual expressions, his face, which he has an incredibly expressive face and eyes, but the dialogue that he's delivering, and you believe it.
I prayed that he would burn in hell, but in my heart, I knew that hell would not have him.
Speaking of Terminator again, I think something that is a bit of a cheat code for some of the more low budget kind of horror movies is have a character that just believes this shit is real. Michael Biehn as Kyle Reese in the first Terminator does a very similar thing for me, where this person, it doesn't matter that yes, I'm watching a movie that has maybe some cheaper effects or whatever, you could tell it's not the highest budget, but this guy believes it's real. Yes, Michael Myers is on the surface just a big guy in a mask walking around with a knife, which, I mean, that's scary in and of itself, but what truly makes him a monster in this original era and what brings this boogeyman nature to him is Donald Pleasance's performance and the way that he talks about and warns everyone around him. And he does a great job. Danielle Harris, who plays Jamie in 4 through 6, or is she in 6? I don't know. During the Thorn trilogy era, she's also fantastic at really selling that fear and making Michael Myers feel larger than life. Ultimately, and this is leading into a little bit, I'm going to talk about the cosmic horror elements of Halloween, which I do think that Michael Myers as a character is a cosmic horror figure to some extent. Donald Pleasance's character, Dr. Loomis, seems like a guy who has just stared into the void a little too long. He has had Michael Myers as a patient for years and years and years, and he has convinced himself that this man is truly evil. He doesn't even consider Michael Myers he doesn't consider him human. It doesn't matter physically what Michael Myers in actuality is, as far as I mean, they do try to add on an actual occult element towards the end of this era. That's definitely where a lot of things drop off. I think once you literally bring in real magic into Halloween, I think it lessens it, because I think a lot of it is what you bring into the mythos of Michael Myers, and I think that speaks to the fact that he's a wonderful blank slate. Michael Myers is a low 5 villain. I think Jordan Peele said that in an interview whenever he talks about he's a huge fan of the Halloween films. You can look up interviews where he's talking about him.
The thing about Michael Myers is I think of him as a truly minimalist villain, which I just love that. I think that's always the scariest.
The fact that, especially if you're watching these movies in low fidelity form on a little CRT TV on VHS, Michael is just a white face on screen. He's a ghost. He's an entity. Once we get into the H2O era and Donald Pleasance is no longer with us, we have to change the hype man. When I say hype man, it doesn't have to be a literal character. I think in the Rob Zombie films, I don't think it's necessarily a literal character that hypes up Michael Myers. I think you just need a force in the film that makes Michael feel like more than just a guy in a mask. And I think that what sells it in this movie is Jamie Lee Curtis's performance, which she really takes the place of Loomis in the sense that her trauma and her fear, the first time I think you see her in this movie, she's having a nightmare about Michael Myers, and you see how intense her night terrors are, and you see how this trauma that she has over Michael has affected her relationship with her son in the movie, played by Josh Hartnett. Which, by the way, speaking of Josh Hartnett, if you haven't seen Trap, please go see Trap. I'm making a note right now, an M. Night Shyamalan video essay is coming. So yeah, in H2O, it's Jamie Lee Curtis, it's Laurie's trauma that is the hype man of Michael Myers. It's what instills the fear. And then Halloween Resurrection happened, and we don't need to talk about that one.
Trick or treat, motherfucker.
So to speak a little towards the elements of Michael Myers that I find to be cosmic horror, or maybe cosmic horror might be the wrong idea, spiritual horror or mental horror, if that makes sense. Basically, something that I find interesting about Michael Myers and what I think is captivating about him in a broader sense than just the man itself is the idea that there is a little piece of Michael Myers in all of us. Like there's a little bit, everybody has the potential to do monstrous behaviors. And the argument that I think the Halloween David Gordon Green trilogy kind of talks towards, and what I think the Rob Zombie films are really talking about, is that thing right there of the whole, whether or not somebody is born with violent tendencies or their upbringing brings about violent tendencies, and how those things together can create a monster, is something that I think is a really interesting thing to explore, and something that I think Michael Myers is an interesting vehicle to explore that through. Halloween Ends really tries to say something about that in particular, and I think not necessarily, like, I don't necessarily care about spoiling Halloween Ends, but I will just say the core problem is that there's a character that is not Michael Myers that they're kind of basing their whole argument around that film, and I simply think that role was miscast. I think the idea is interesting that they have, the idea is very bold, but I just do not think the actor they got was right for the role. I think they needed somebody to bring a different energy to it that it needed. However, I do think Rob Zombie was onto something there, though. I know that Rob Zombie's Halloween films are extremely highly debated. A lot of people hate them. I think there is a strong facet of people who really love them. A lot of the people who it seems like really love them are people who those movies were their first exposure to the Halloween franchise. I did not see them until this past Halloween, and I saw them together with every other film in the franchise. So to me, it's just another era. It's a different take. So with the Rob Zombie introduction, I'm mostly talking about Halloween 1. I wasn't a huge fan of Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 for honestly different reasons than a lot of people, but that's not what this is about. But talking about Rob Zombie's first Halloween, the biggest departure that it makes is basically the first half of the film is a whole origin story for Michael. You see Michael as a kid, he's walking, he's talking, you see his family upbringing, how shitty his stepdad is to him. You see like his older sister, they immediately establish that Lori, or Angel Myers, I believe her name is in the movie, before she's adopted. Lori's her little baby sister that is the only one that he cares about. And you know, he's growing up in an extremely abusive household, and I think that on the surface, the argument that might be made here is that, like, you know, Michael is how he is because of his shitty upbringing, but I don't think that's really all of it. There's an innate darkness, and there's an innate trouble that this kid has, this tendency towards violence that would be there whether or not he grew up in a nice household, and then it was instigated by his abusive family. And then even furthermore, and it's something that Halloween 2 explores a little bit more, when he is under the custody of Dr. Loomis and he's in the hospital, there's a whole section kind of like in the middle where we see a little bit of their interactions and Loomis getting to know Michael as a child. Loomis actively provoked the dark tendencies in Michael, basically to see how far he can go, how much of a monster can he create, down to, like, I believe I don't remember if they say it in the first film or the second one, but down to allowing Michael to make all these paper mache masks in his hospital room, you know, really encouraging all of this dark, dangerous behavior, because Loomis is, you know, he wants to get rich off of it. Like, you know, he's writing his book. In the second movie, he's doing all these speeches about it, and you know, there's an interesting controversy that's like Loomis is almost turned into a villain character in Rob Zombie's Halloween, which, once again, a lot of people were pissed about. I thought it was a really interesting take. I thought there was a lot of interesting ideas that they decided to explore in Rob Zombie's Halloween, and I still think that they really kept the core of what makes Michael scary. So the last thing I want to talk about might be surprising to most, but when I watch Rob Zombie's Halloween, and just in general now when I think about this whole franchise, I can't help but think about a particular episode of Ed, Edd n Eddy. The episode is called The Day That Ed Stood Still, and the basic premise of the episode is Eddie wants to make a carnival kind of like roadside attraction type scam situation, and part of that involves making a monster costume that Ed can put on and pretend to be a monster. And the moment that Ed does put on the monster costume, he kind of goes full method with it and starts actually behaving like a monster, like acting like a slide. There's like some alien references towards the end too, where he's like sticking people with like shoot up cereal to the walls like the like aliens. And that episode really scared me as a kid. And while I was watching Rob Zombie's Halloween, I kept thinking about that episode because it's a lot of the same kind of messaging. It's like, what is a monster? I think is at the core of this entire franchise. I think it's the question that it kind of keeps beating you over the head with. It. Some people have a hard time with enjoying these movies, is I think that people read it as a bit too simple. It's just a guy in a mask. It's just a man with a knife. But the question I think you have to ask yourself is, you know, at the end of the day, you are what you believe, right? Like at your core, if it doesn't matter that literally Ed from that Ed and Eddie episode is just a kid in a costume, he believes he's a monster. He's behaving like a monster. So for all intents and purposes, he is. And I think you can apply the same kind of thing to Michael Myers, whether or not like you think, you know, you interpret the movies as like he literally is some kind of like demon entity that's possessing this body, or it's just a guy who has a lot of mental health issues, like, and the way that people perceive him is what makes him a monster. And I want to reiterate here that I'm just talking about how all these things are portrayed in film and in a movie and in this fictional world, because we're all human, we're all capable of these dark things. And, you know, to a certain extent, I think what's interesting about the Halloween movies, that they kind of remind us of that, almost, that there is a little bit of darkness in all of us, and that at the end of the day, that's the thing that's scariest about him, is that, you know, like, he is just a guy. He is a human being. Like, somebody can just put on the mask and take on the persona of this character and become that. You know, anybody can be Michael Myers, and that's kind of what's scary.